Break, break. It's not one Corsair, it's a dozen. The radio scream came too late. At 320 ma, a wall of 12 F4U Corsairs ripped out of a rising column what radar had shown as a single contact just seconds before. Japanese Zeros dove from 11,000 feet, confident it was just a lone recon bird. It wasn't. It was a vertical ambush. Lieutenant Kazuo, a 19-year-old Zero wingman, was the first to spot the shadow, just one silhouette at 6,000 feet. No escort, no wing sweep. He called the dive. The formation followed. At 400 to 900 feet, the lone Corsair split. Then the second peeled off. Then 10 more. 12 Corsairs exploded upward in a delta burst. The first Zero took a full nose burst, hit at 600 yards. Instant vapor. The rest scattered. Now beneath enemy guns. In 14 seconds, the ambushers became the ambushed. The move that set it all off, a formation called stacked shadow. It violated carrier spacing. It was banned in flight school. It was never meant to fly in combat. Peleliu Airspace, September 14, 1944. Intercept Mission Echo 7. The manual didn't cover what came next. You'll kill your own men before you fool the enemy. That was the official response from Training Squadron 5 aboard USS Bunker Hill when Lieutenant Ray Granger first proposed it. He'd flown Corsairs in Solomon sorties and noticed something odd on 3 separate occasions. Radar crews reported single contacts, even when they flew in groups. Why altitude stacking? When Corsairs flew with just 80 to 100 feet vertical spacing, their shadows and radar cross-section merged. But Command didn't care about radar games. They cared about mid-air safety. Standard doctrine enforced 300-foot vertical separation between fighters in formation. Carrier-qualified squadrons were drilled on it relentlessly. Prop-wash turbulence at under 150 feet was considered unsafe. At under 100 feet, lethal. And yet Granger swore he'd seen enemy formations fail to spot his full flight visually and on radar when they stacked tight. He proposed a new formation vertical echelon, with spacing at 75 feet, tail-to-nose shadow alignment, and matching pitch angle. The room laughed. The air group commander called it combat stupidity disguised as cleverness. A test run nearly ended in collision during a wind shear burst. The flight manual was updated with a bolded clause: do not attempt vertical stack formations during live operations. The idea was buried until Peleliu. That's where Granger's squadron rotated in September 1944. The Japanese had been sending one-plane scouts, followed by full Zero flights and pincer ambushes. Granger flipped the play. He proposed sending his 12 Corsairs up as a false recon, visually appearing as a single fighter. If they could stack clean, they could bait the enemy into diving first, losing energy and position, then fan out and counter. The mechanic said no one would be dumb enough to fly in that tight a column. His XO said, "You're hiding strength by pretending to be weak that's backwards." But 3 rookies volunteered. They practiced over water. 10-minute runs, exact 80-foot spacing, 3-degree nose pitch, 275 mph cruise. No deviation. It worked. By September 13th, 12 pilots had trained in the stack. The briefing log called it Recon Flight Echo 7. On paper, just another sweep. But under Granger's orders, they'd fly one of the most deceptive formations of the war. And that's when Command stepped in with a new rule. If enemy contact is confirmed, break and reform standard combat spread immediately. But the warning came too late, because the Zeros already saw them and thought it was just one. Japanese air doctrine in 1944 remained rooted in early war confidence: fast strikes, clean dives, and numerical or positional advantage. The A6M Zero still held vertical superiority below 15,000 feet when speed and surprise were in its favor. But over time, its weakness became fatal: an over-reliance on visual ID and immediate engagement. Intercept procedure was strict. Radar spotters gave direction and speed, but not altitude. Pilots were trained to trust what they saw. Single contact, assume scout. Double contact, assume recon with escort. Anything more. And standard protocol called for wide flanking until numbers confirmed. But there was no doctrine for what to do if 12 aircraft looked like one. Over Peleliu, radar picked up a Corsair group inbound at 6,000 feet. Tight. No variance. One dot on the screen. Radio reported lone contact. Heading 190. Speed 270 knots. The mission lead Ensign Haruto called it a recon scout. They'd seen this profile before. Split 3, angle right. Dive on contact. They didn't question it. To Haruto, the biggest danger was not taking the chance early. If it was recon, and they waited, the scout would escape and report their position. The mission was coded. Red Echo intercept before visibility breach. They had under 3 minutes. The Zeros formed a basic delta. 7 aircraft total, descending from 11,000 feet. The climb angle of the Corsair below them was shallow, almost too perfect. The lead pilot radioed once visual confirmed. 1 enemy fighter, 9 o'clock low, no escort. No one noticed the shadow elongation. No one saw the slight roll corrections. Even when one of the wingmen asked, "Is that prop wash shimmer behind it?" the call was ignored. At 340 Mami-ya-chor, they were committed. Japanese doctrine emphasized the kill shot over verification. Attack first, identify after. But that doctrine had never accounted for a formation designed to look wrong on purpose. They dove fast, banking in 2 wings, one straight in, the other angling right. By the time the altitude dropped below 5,000 feet, 2 Corsairs had already unstacked and begun throttle up, but the Zeros were still hunting a ghost. And when the illusion snapped, it didn't break slowly. It exploded. The Zero formation dove at 340 mph from 11,000 feet. Their attack angle was shallow 26 degrees, designed for a smooth intercept without overshooting. From above, the Corsair formation still looked like a single fighter cruising at 275 mph, nose up at just 3 degrees pitch. But the illusion was built on geometry. Lieutenant Granger's stacked shadow tactic hinged on vertical compression. 12 F4U Corsairs were spaced at 80 feet intervals, with each pilot holding dead center on the prop wash of the plane below. Their shadow trails, due to midday sun, overlapped completely. Radar picked it up as one, and to the Zeros approaching from above and behind the alignment looked like a single, long fuselage. They were closing fast. At 6,000 feet, the lead Corsair began subtle throttle up, just 15 mph for a difference, but enough to ripple through the formation. Each pilot held formation discipline until Granger's left wing dipped the pre-agreed signal. That dip came at 4,900 feet. The Zeros had already begun their dive correction. Altitude differential was shrinking fast, less than 1,000 feet remained. Contact in under 7 seconds. 1-0 pilot Lieutenant Nishida radioed, "Contact is not changing shape." That was the first warning. It wasn't growing. It wasn't maneuvering. It was holding steady. Then the trap sprung. At exactly 4 over 850 feet, the Corsairs broke stack in a synchronized fanned burst. 6 peeled left, 5 right, and Granger surged forward. The formation unraveled in 1.2 seconds, less time than it takes to shift throttle on a Zero. Their energy was now above the Zeros and converging. Lead Zero tried to pull out of his dive, but his airspeed was too high, 357 mph, his turn radius wide. He couldn't reverse. First Corsair fired at 600 yards. Downward burst at 15 degrees angle. 350 caliber rounds hit the Zero's engine cowling. Flash of flame. Instant spiral. The rest of the Zeros realized too late. They were now beneath 12 enemy fighters who had lured them into a speed trap from below. 1 second ago. The Americans were prey. Now they were gravity-fed predators. And the Japanese flight leader hadn't even seen the worst part yet because Granger hadn't fired a single shot. The first shot came from the lowest Corsair in the right peel. Lieutenant Martin Rookie, 22 years old, 3rd Combat Sortie. He had trained for high-angle dives and lateral deflections, not upward snap rolls. But at 4,800 feet, with 3 Zeros in his forward arc and altitude advantage inverted, He pulled a maneuver never taught. He banked hard right, rolled left, and pitched up into a vertical corkscrew. His airspeed was just 280 mph, barely enough to maintain lift, but his 50 cals were already hot. As the second Zero passed overhead at 320 mph, Martin squeezed the trigger at 650 yards. A shot outside approved convergence range. Doctrine said, hold fire, let the angle close, wait for the silhouette to fill the ring. Martin ignored it. 3 rounds struck the Zero's right aileron. The Japanese pilot snapped into an unintentional roll and clipped the edge of another diving wingman's path, causing both to split formation. 2 seconds later, Corsair number 6, flown by Lieutenant Delgado, dove from 5,100 feet and struck a third Zero from above with a 2-second burst. That kill was textbook 370 mile, 18-degree angle, 300-yard shot. Flames blew backward across the cockpit. Confirmed splash. But it was Martin's shot that triggered the shift. His fire early, misaligned, and wrong forced the Zeros to scatter. It broke the coordination they needed for a second pass. And it exposed their lack of vertical defense. Zeros weren't armored underneath. Most pilots still wore no flak vests. One tracer in the belly meant engine fire, or worse. At 400 or 500 feet, Granger finally joined the fight. He'd held position at the top of the stack during the fake formation, conserving speed. Now he nosed over and hit 340 mph in a shallow dive, angling straight toward the center of the disoriented Zero pack. 2 were breaking left. 1 was spiraling down. Another tried to gain altitude straight into his line. At 400 yards, Granger opened fire. All 6 wing-mounted guns roared. The Zero jerked once, then disintegrated mid-air. The sky went quiet for a half-second. Then the Zeros responded. They kicked into the second wave with vengeance, climbing to regain the high ground. They had numbers, altitude, and fury. But what they didn't know was that Granger's formation was already adapting faster, and one Corsair was about to lose everything at 3,200 feet. The Japanese formation was bleeding, but it wasn't broken. 4 Zeros remained airborne, and all had the same instinct drilled into them since Rabal get above, dive fast, disappear, at 3,900 feet. The remaining Zeros pulled hard into vertical spirals, trading speed for altitude. Their engines roared past 3,000 RPM, clawing upward at 270 mph in a corkscrew climb. Granger's squadron had the advantage, but only for a moment. Their initial burst had sacrificed energy. Most Corsairs had dropped below 3,000 feet during the opening attack. Now they were slower, lower, and scattered. 1 Zero pilot Lieutenant Araki saw the gap. Below him, Corsair No. 9 was isolated, still trying to recover from an overroll. The pilot, Ensign Becker, was the youngest in the squadron, just 20 years old. He had overshot his attack angle and was banking hard right to rejoin. But he was too low 3,200 feet and too slow 240 mph. Araki dove from 400 or 500 feet. He zeroed in at a 20-degree angle. Closure rate 100 mph. Becker didn't see him coming until the final 300 yards. The Corsair jolted as tracer rounds ripped through its left wing. One hit the aileron servo line, another struck the oil cooler intake. Becker's engine surged past 280 degrees. Red warning light flickered. The Corsair veered left, unresponsive. "I've been hit," Becker shouted, but the squadron couldn't hear him. His transmitter had taken a glancing shot. Communications failed. Granger spotted the trail white smoke, dipping low and tried to turn, but the Zero above him blocked his path. They were being funneled, corralling Corsairs into defensive positions, just like they'd done to Wildcats 2 years before. At 3,000 feet, the airspace turned into a layered mess, Corsairs low and recovering, Zeros high and hunting. For a moment, the Pacific War had flipped back. The ambushers were on the run. Their vertical trap had become a liability. The Japanese had altitude, momentum, and a wounded enemy to chase. Granger yelled into the radio, "Corsairs, climb right. Don't chase, reset the stack." But not all of them could climb. Becker was spiraling down, engine choking. Turn radius wide. Iraqi lined up for the kill, and unless someone broke doctrine, again, Becker would be gone in under 8 seconds. Becker's Corsair was bleeding speed and altitude, engine temp surging past 255 smoke now trailing solid behind the fuselage. His last full control input had been a left bank at 300 feet, but now the stick fought him. The aircraft wanted to roll right, and his rudder response was mush. Above him, Iraqi's Zero tightened the angle. The kill shot was seconds away. Granger couldn't reach him. At 3,600 feet, he had 2 Zeros pressing him into a defensive turn. Corsair number 4 tried to break into the climb and assist, but overshot, getting lit up with a 1.5-second burst right wingtip punctured. No major damage, but forced to dive away. Time was out. At 2,700 feet, Becker made a desperate move. He cut throttle to idle, kicked full right rudder, and yanked back hard. The Corsair stalled. It was the wrong move, or should have been. The wings shuddered. Airspeed dropped to 130 miles per hour. The nose dipped. For half a second, he was weightless. The stall alarm clicked, and then the left wing dropped into a spin. The Corsair tumbled. Iraqi's Zero overshot by inches. At 2,500 feet, Becker jammed throttle forward and punched right aileron. The F4U flipped once, engine coughing, then leveled out. RPMs barely held 200. Oil pressure was down 40%, but the stall had saved him. Iraqi tried to follow the tumble, but his Zero wasn't built for high-speed reversals that close to the deck. He dipped too hard, then caught a snapshot burst from Corsair number 6 diving in from a shallow arc. 350 cal rounds hit his fuselage, and the Zero trailed smoke as it pulled out wide. No longer a threat. Becker couldn't climb. His engine temps were now pegged at 300 oil pressure at 45 psi. Any further combat would seize the motor, but he was alive. He dipped to 200 feet, found a descending path west toward open sea, and hoped the engine would hold for 8 more minutes. Above, the Corsair squadron was now scattered across 3,000 feet of vertical space. Fuel loads were falling under 45%, and the radios were crackling from overheating units. Granger called regroup Titan, climb, reset. But one of the remaining Zeros had done something unexpected. It wasn't diving. It was hovering at 4,700 feet, waiting. Because the final act wouldn't be a chase, it would be a bait play of their own. Granger had only tested it in theory. Stacked shadow wasn't a combat tactic, it was a deception trick. But its math was solid. When 12 Corsairs flew in vertical echelon with exactly 80 feet of vertical spacing, a 3-degree nose-up pitch, and 275 mile-per-hour cruise, their combined radar signature collapsed into one blip. Their shadows projected by high sun angles aligned tail to nose. To the eye and to early radar, one plane, but it was dangerous. At that spacing, prop wash became unpredictable. The F4U's massive engine and wide prop created violent turbulence. One mistake, overcorrection. Stall, or yaw, and the trailing plane could clip wings or worse. That's why standard Navy spacing was 300 vertical feet. Stacked shadow ignored it completely. Granger didn't intend to fight in this stack. It was designed to draw the enemy into a dive, bleed their energy, then brake and reverse. The Corsair's strength wasn't turn rate, it was power and dive speed. A Zero could outturn anything, but it couldn't recover as quickly from a vertical overshoot, especially at high closure rates. Timing was everything. The window for the trap to work was 90 seconds. If the enemy dove too late, they'd break off. If they dove too early, the Corsairs would still be in formation, unable to split. The signal to break was a single dip of Granger's left wing. Once that happened, the Corsairs had to peel into 2 fanned groups, gain speed, and rise through the enemy's dive arc before the Zeros could reverse climb. If done too slow, trap failed. Too fast, overshoot and separation. The original plan called for the Corsairs to regroup after 60 seconds, but that failed. The Zeros adapted faster than expected. By the 70-second mark, Corsairs were scattered across altitudes between 2,000 and 5,000 feet, fuel levels dropping, ammunition low. And now, above them, one last Zero hovered. It wasn't diving. It was climbing gently in a half-loop spiral, waiting to bait a Corsair into a vertical chase, a trick Granger himself had used against others. Only now it was being used on him. He had two options: follow the Zero up and risk a high stall, or bait the bait. Granger chose a third option, one not found in any manual, and it started with diving at 30 degrees into open sea. Granger yanked the Corsair's nose down to 30 degrees, throttle wide open. Airspeed jumped from 270 to 310 mph in 5 seconds. The rest of the squadron saw him drop and assumed a retreat. But Granger had calculated a different kind of engagement geometry. The Zero above was baiting a vertical spiral, expecting a reactive climb. Instead, he'd draw it horizontal, then snap it inverted. At 2,800 feet, Granger leveled out for 3 seconds, just long enough for the Zero to dip a wing and follow. The bait had worked. The Japanese pilot, seeing a fleeing enemy at low altitude, committed. Closure rate 60 mph. Distance 100 yards. Granger's engine held 2,600 RPM. Coolant temp rising toward 290 degrees. He needed less than 12 seconds to reset the angle. At 2,500 feet, he snapped into a full 4G climb at 22 degrees, forcing airspeed to bleed. The Corsair climbed from 310 to 240 mph in 4.2 seconds. The Zero, following close, mirrored the arc, but its lighter frame gave it higher pitch response. That was the trap. Granger pulled throttle back to 65%, holding RPM at 2,400 to simulate stall onset. His aircraft felt heavy. Lift margin narrowed. The Zero closed the gap 900 yards, then 800. Just 3 more seconds. Granger kicked right rudder, rolled left 40 degrees, then snapped the nose down into a vertical dive, a rolling hammerhead. The Corsair flipped nose first into gravity, shedding altitude like a falling blade. The Zero, unprepared for the reversal, shot past just 150 feet overhead. At 2,300 feet, Granger stabilized the dive at 15 degrees nose down. The Zero was now directly in his gun sight, range 700 yards and closing. He pushed throttle back to 100%, guns armed. 3, 2, 1. Now. He fired a 2.1-second burst. All 650 cals spat flame. At 480 yards, 3 rounds punched through the Zero's right wing root. At 400 yards, tracers chewed into the canopy. Then a fireball. No parachute. Confirmed kill. Granger pulled out at 1,800 feet, engine temp now 305 degrees, fuel at 36%. He nosed west and climbed back to 2,400. 2 Corsairs rejoined on his wing. They were scattered, low on ammo, but alive. The sky was clear. Not a single Zero remained in visual range. Total combat time 91 seconds. 6 Zeros down. 2 Corsairs damaged. No American losses. Granger called the regroup at vector 281 speed, 240 altitude, 2,700 feet. But there was still one final threat radio silence from base. And the manual didn't cover what to do when you won the fight but couldn't get home. Granger leveled at 2,700 feet, scanning every quadrant. His altimeter steadied. Engine RPM held at 2,300, but his fuel gauge was dropping 38 gallons remaining. That gave him 11 minutes of flight at 70% throttle, just enough to reach Peleliu, if there were no detours. But one Corsair Delgado's reported worse. Engine running hot, down to 21 gallons. Delgado radioed, max 5 minutes. Becker, the rookie who'd taken a hit earlier, had barely stabilized. His engine was rattling at 2,000 RPM, oil pressure under 40 psi, and a persistent sputter in climb. They had altitude, they had a heading, but they were 2 minutes from being combat ineffective. And that's when the last threat appeared. A dot. Far east. Low. Moving fast, likely 290 mph. Too big to be a zero, not climbing, not evasive. Granger called it possible Betty bomber check bearings. Do not engage. The dot veered south. It wasn't alone. A second dot emerged, slightly higher, trailing faint smoke. Could have been an American rescue bird or a Japanese twin-engine evac flight. The Corsairs had one rule left to follow: don't chase shadows with empty tanks. But Becker's voice cracked in. I think that's mine. Same zero that hit me. I saw the tail art. He's leaking. There it was, the revenge instinct, the fatal temptation. With just 19 gallons left, Becker was ready to go after a trailing enemy. Engine damage and all. Granger had seen this play before. It got pilots killed. Negative, Granger snapped. Your Winchester. No ammo, no speed, no altitude to lose. Stay on vector. Becker hesitated. The Betty, or Zero, or Ghost kept flying due south, out of intercept range. But Delgado was still losing pressure. Becker's stall margin was closing fast, and Granger's compass gyro had begun to stick spinning 5 degrees every 10 seconds. Navigation would soon rely on landmarks alone. Worse, their radios were starting to distort. Static crackled. No base response, no rescue vector. Just the wind and their own exhaustion. At 2,000 feet, the squadron reformed in loose triangle. 2 damaged aircraft. 3 low fuel warnings. 1 pilot nearly out of oil pressure. And 1 unknown contact still visible. 7 miles south. Granger called final break-off contact. Nose west. If you've got more than 10 gallons. Throttle 65%. Delgado's Corsair sputtered, then steadied. Just enough to hold formation. Becker's RPMs dipped to 1,900. He dropped to 1,600 feet, fuel at 14 gallons. They were close. But unless the island was where the map said and the wind hadn't shifted, they were landing blind, low, and hot. At 1,300 feet, the Pacific shimmered like a silver minefield. The heat distortion from the Corsairs' engines blurred the horizon, and Becker was flying wounded engine clattering at 1,850 RPM. Every control input delayed by a half-second. Granger scanned west. They should have seen Peleliu's runway by now. Nothing. Just ocean. Then, at 900 feet, Delgado spotted it. Island, 10 o'clock low. 4 miles. Becker's fuel light flickered. 11 gallons. Engine temp 312 degrees. His hydraulic pressure was falling under 600 psi, just below safe gear deployment threshold. Granger made the call. All aircraft. Gear down at 600 feet. If it locks, you land. If it doesn't, belly it and slide. Delgado went first. Corsair number 6. Left gear dropped and locked. Right one didn't. He rocked the aircraft hard. Left twice. Gear lock clicked. Flaps down. Landing speed 105 miles. Granger followed Corsair number 1. Gear steady, temp stable, 16 gallons left. Touchdown was bumpy. Right wheel struck a hidden rock under the matting, skidded hard left. But no damage. Becker came last. Gear half deployed. He fought to keep speed under 120 feet in Embraer with throttle idle. Flaps only partially responding. He committed to a wheels-up landing. The belly hit first sparks, smoke, and a long 240-foot slide. His aircraft finally stopped 50 yards short of the sand berm. Cockpit intact, alive. The ground crew rushed in. 1 Corsair had a bent gear strut. 1 had a wing punctured through. Becker's fuselage smoked gently. The final fuel gauge reading 2 gallons. 2 hours later, in the mission debriefing tent, the combat camera officer reviewed Granger's gun footage. 6 confirmed kills, 3 flameouts, 1 mid-air breakup. The imagery was clear, but the reaction was not. The base intel officer, Lieutenant Commander Harris, said quietly, "That formation tactic, you were under standing orders not to compress spacing that tight. That violates every air safety protocol we've got." Granger didn't blink, and yet it worked. Harris folded the mission tape into a labeled metal canister and locked it in a desk drawer. It worked this time. Doesn't mean it gets repeated. The squadron was given a verbal commendation. No written record. No unit citation. The kills were filed individually, no mention of the trap. No note of the fake formation. And nothing. Absolutely nothing. About Stacked Shadow. Unofficial whispers started that week. Pilots from VMF 114 began practicing tighter stack formations. Someone from Air Group 15 called it the ghost spine. Navy HQ never confirmed it. And even as the blackened Corsair was towed behind the hangar, no one officially admitted that a rejected formation trick had wiped out 6 elite zeros in 91 seconds. No orders came, no memos circulated. But within 3 weeks of the battle, 3 other squadrons began running shadow drills. VMF 114's pilots, now rotated to the Solomons, were seen flying unusually close vertical stacks on early patrols. They didn't call it Stacked Shadow. They didn't call it anything. But air crews noticed. Maintenance logs from March 1945 showed a 40% increase in upper fuselage paint touch-ups where prop wash was chipping the finish. That only happened when planes flew too close, too stacked. The training officer at Espiritu Santo later recalled seeing Corsairs running ghost climbs low-pitch ascents in single-line verticals at 275 mph, exactly Granger's bait speed. Unofficially, pilots began referring to the tactic as spine flying, and though no flight manual approved it, instructors began quietly including angle collapse drills during late-day sorties. They would fly with the sun directly above, aligning shadows, testing perception. Granger himself was never debriefed again. His after-action report was filed, ignored, and eventually misplaced. But the kill ratio from his squadron's next 12 sorties, 23 confirmed kills. Only 2 Corsairs lost. Every enemy contact had been forced into a vertical fight below 5,000 feet, within trap altitude, and the rumor spread further. A Marine Corsair detachment from Ulithi sent back a sketch labeled The Stack Trick, showing 5 Corsairs in vertical descent with one line reading, "One becomes many, don't blink." It was never published, but it was photocopied. Then it was memorized. By late March 1945, the unofficial numbers told the truth. 0 pilots began pulling out of dives at higher altitudes. Some even refused to engage lone radar blips that held a 3-degree climb. They'd seen it before, or heard of it. The myth was in motion. No signature, no paper. Just a ripple of unease every time an American blip held steady in the sky, too steady. And somewhere, some rookie pilot new to the war, new to the Pacific, was being shown how to fly just tight enough that your wingman's shadow looks like yours. Because the kill was never just about firepower, it was about what the enemy believed they saw, 90 seconds before they died. The Corsair that landed belly first, Becker's burned, battered fighter, was never flown again. Ground crews stripped it for parts within 48 hours. The oil-stained wings were used to patch 2 damaged aircraft. The engine block was melted down weeks later to reinforce a carrier catapult housing. No photo was ever officially filed. No tail number remained on record. Becker stayed in the war. He recovered from minor burns, requalified after engine-out training, and flew 19 more missions, 2 confirmed kills, 1 probable. He never again flew in formation tighter than 200 vertical feet. But he remembered that stall, the dead stick spin that saved him. The mistake that made him a survivor. Granger. He completed his tour with 14 confirmed. Quiet. Precise. No flair. When asked about the March 1945 ambush years later, all he said was, "They aimed for 1. We gave them 12. He never explained more. The Stacked Shadow maneuver never entered any official Navy training guide. No film was made. No chalkboard diagram survived. But its ghost lived on in formation spacing, in pilot whispers, in the hesitation it caused among 0 leaders who'd once pressed every attack. It taught young flyers that sometimes the most effective weapon wasn't a bullet, it was confusion. delivered at 275 mph and 80 feet apart. The Corsair itself flew into history. Over 12,000 built, but only a handful ever flew the real version of the trap. Most pilots dismissed the tactic as reckless. Some called it suicidal. But one day, March 11, 1945, it worked, and no one ever forgot. Because when 6 Zeros dove toward a single dot in the sky, they didn't find an easy kill. They found a formation with no name, a maneuver never taught, and a war they thought they were winning until they didn't. Reconstruct the geometry. 12 Corsairs, 1 shadow, enemy inbound, start the stack now.